So Casio has been getting really popular, especially with the general public, but I think they're still primarily known for just two things, and that's for making really cheap, cool digital watches and for making G-Shocks. But this year, Casio has been releasing a whole ton of new models that I think are targeted more at people that are casually interested in watches, people who are looking for a good, high-quality watch, more of a casual watch, and they've done something a little bit crazy or fun or tongue-in-cheek with this release because they basically released an Apple Watch. That's not a smartwatch at all. It's a Casio watch. It's a really cool watch, but it clearly is an homage to the Apple Watch. What does all this mean? Take a quick look and then let's talk about it. Hey guys, welcome back to Just the Watch. My name's Dave. I live in Japan and I love to collect affordable watches. And living here in Japan, I always try and keep an eye on what Casio is doing because they're one of the kings when it comes to creating high quality, affordable watches. But like I said in the intro, I think they're most known for making either really cheap digital watches. In fact, there's a whole category of watches here in Japan that people refer to as the cheap Casio. Like literally they have a term for it here. It's called cheapukashi, which is shortened for cheap Casio. But the cheap Casios or the affordable Casios or the awesome Casios as we like to call them, they're mostly digital watches. They're mostly made out of plastic cases that are very durable. They have a ton of functions. They have decent water resistance. They're just amazing value. You spend like $20 and you get so much watch, and that's really all you need. But these watches have a lot of their appeal because of their functionality and because of their retro aesthetic, not because they're great fashionable watches, not because they're a good modern casual watch. And there are a lot of people out there who are looking for a decent analog watch, something that they can wear just on, normal occasions, whether it be in the office or going out on the town. And that cheap retro digital look is not what they're going for. That's why brands like MVMT and Daniel Wellington really sprung up and captured so many people's attention. And I think that's the market that Casio is starting to really target here. Particularly this year, I've seen a lot of watches in their MTP line. Particularly in 2023, I've seen a lot of models with the MTP prefix in their model number that have stainless steel cases, that have mineral crystals, that have the kind of level of specs you would associate with watches that cost right around that, between $75 to $100 price point. Perhaps most famous this year is the really hard to find MTP 1302, which is their sort of Tiffany blue Rolex homage. But that's not the only famous watch that Casio was taking inspiration from this year, because they also just dropped what looks very much like an Apple Watch. And I think it really shows that Casio has a sense of humor and a good pulse on what people are looking for in an affordable watch. Now, this watch is kind of hard to track down right now, just like the Tiffany blue Rolex-inspired one is. But I was able to pick one up, so I want to show it to you guys, especially you Casio hunters out there who might be looking to grab something like this, see if it's worth your time or worth the money. Let's take a look at it and see what we got. So if Casio is going to convince people to jump up in price from around $20 to around $80 or $100, they're going to have to increase the quality of the materials that they use. And I think they've made a pretty compelling case for that on this particular watch. Rather than getting plastic that has been painted to look like metal or getting a plated brass case, this is going with a full stainless steel case. The finishing on the case is fully polished, so nothing very interesting, but it is pretty well done. There's not any seams or weld marks or anything like that. It's a nice, simple looking case. You're also getting a mineral glass crystal on this watch, which is exactly what you would expect for a watch in this price range from a major brand. And it is a big upgrade from the thin plasticky crystals that Casio uses on their cheap watches. Sure, a scratch-proof sapphire crystal would be nice, but you're really not seeing that in the competing major brands in this price range. So I think mineral is fine here. The next thing that I really like about this watch is the movement inside. Now, this is a quartz movement. However, it's a very nice quartz movement with some interesting complications on it. The moon phase is definitely the highlight here. It is really cool to see an actual full functioning moon phase and not something that's like a day-night indicator that looks like a moon phase. Once set, this watch will display the current phase of the moon, and it will keep relatively accurate to that. And I think this complication adds a lot of interest both visually and functionally to this watch. Especially on the silver dial version, I think that moon phase cutout at the 6 o'clock position is just a really gorgeous looking complication. The deep blue night sky is contrasted nicely with the golden moon and stars. Looks great on this watch, and I think it really makes it look like a more expensive or premium watch. And the same can be said with the day-date subdials. I think when a lot of people see complications on a watch like subdials or a moon phase, they tend to associate it with a more intricate, more premium product, and that is true in a sense. You know, with modern quartz movements, it's not as big a deal as it used to be when everything had to be done mechanically. But even still, there's a lot of cheap quartz watches out there that have fake subdials and kind of fake complications or less than functional complications, whereas Casio is giving you the genuine article. And that moon phase in particular is kind of a rare complication for a watch, and it's kind of a useful one too for a lot of people. At the very least, it's a very fun and interesting one to have. It's really cool to be able to look at your wrist and know what phase of the moon it's going to be. Is it going to be a full moon tonight? Is there going to be no moon tonight? I mean, that's just something that a lot of people are kind of curious about, especially if you're interested in astronomy or astrophotography, in more of a casual interest where you wouldn't already be checking that. If you have a casual interest in those things, you might look at your watch and be like, oh, this might be a good night to go look at the stars that I hadn't really thought of before. So that full stainless steel case, the mineral crystal, and that really cool quartz movement with these complications like the moon phase, I think all of these do justify the sort of mid-range price that Casio is shooting for here. Now, one area that's not as big of an upgrade is the bracelet on this watch. This is a folded link bracelet from Casio, which you see on a lot of their really cheap, really affordable watches. And it's a slight upgrade, I think. I think the finishing is a little bit better than I've seen on a lot of those really cheap bracelets from Casio. Visually, it looks really good. I like the flat horizontal links, and I like the brushed finish that goes across them. And then on the sides of the links, usually that's the rough part on these braces where you can really see the folds. But here, Casio has gone ahead and finished them by polishing them up, which actually really improves the visual look. You kind of have to do a double take to see those folds there. Unfortunately, that illusion of quality is kind of shook up a bit when you actually put it on the wrist because it still feels pretty much the same as other folded link bracelets from Casio that I've tried. You get that sort of hair pulling on your wrist, and it definitely doesn't feel as nice as a solid link bracelet. That said, this watch features 20mm lugs, and it's very common to see watches in this price range come with subpar bracelets and straps. Oftentimes, to get the most out of watches like this, you're going to wind out swapping out the bracelet or the strap anyways. And so since this comes with 20mm straps, you have a lot of options there. I think the no-brainer would be to put it on a mesh bracelet, but if you want to swap it over to a leather one, you've also got a lot of options with that as well. So quality aside, let's talk a little bit about the design of this watch. And the first thing I think we have to talk about is the inspiration for this watch. It does seem very clear that Casio has sort of drawn inspiration from the Apple Watch, and that is a fun and interesting part of the design of this watch. That rounded rectangular case design and those proportions really do scream Apple Watch to me. And I think the fact that they went with a multifunction watch with those two subdials and the moon phase also kind of leans into that Apple Watch design in that you're kind of giving an information overload on the dial of the watch. The handset and the indexes all have these sort of soft curved edges that, again, I think all sort of reference Apple's design language in sort of a tongue-in-cheek way. And it is really fun to see a design like this. I think it does show a little bit of humor on Casio's part to go for this and to put this out at such an affordable price. And I think it's a smart move too. I think this design is going to appeal to a lot of different people. You're going to have people that maybe they admire the Apple Watch, but for whatever reason can't or won't buy one. Maybe they can't afford it because it's too expensive, or maybe they just don't like all the hassle that comes with having the notifications and having to keep it charged, and they just want something simpler and cheaper, and they just go with this because it has that same look as an Apple Watch. I think it's going to appeal to Casio fans who like that sort of tongue-in-cheek reference, who want a good casual watch like this. It's a fun story. It's a fun thing to show to your friends and to say, hey, look at this kind of crazy watch from Casio. But beyond the novelty, I think this watch also makes just a pretty decent casual watch. It's a nice, fashionable design. It's a normal watch that will work for pretty much any situation. It's got a great build quality, the price is right, and the design has a lot of character. On the one hand, it's tempting to say that there's not a lot of square watches out there, but again, if you look at this case profile, it's very similar to that of the Apple Watch, which is probably the most popular watch that's on people's wrists these days. So overall, I think this is a really fun, really well executed idea at this price point. Now let's focus a little bit more on the details of this watch. There's some interesting things going on, particularly on the dial here. As you would expect, this is a square-shaped dial, and it has a metallic finish with horizontal brushing on it that I think kind of accentuates that shape a little bit. The dial is a silver color, and the indexes, markers, and hands are all done in a metallic blue. The markings on the dial look to be very thinly applied. They're not like big, thick metallic markers that you would see on a dive watch, but they do have a slightly raised effect, and all of the edges are very clean and very sharp, so no quality control issues there. The blue color is very dark, so indoors it often looks black, but when it catches the light, it has a very bright, vibrant blue look to it. You're also getting fairly minimal text on the dial with just Casio's logo up at 12 o'clock and then water resist 50 meters down at the 6 o'clock. As far as legibility goes, it's pretty easy to read the time at a glance, but there are no minute or second markers, so it is a little bit harder to read the time down to the individual minute. And while that day subdial with the days of the week is pretty easy to pick out, the date subdial with the 31 individual tick marks is much harder to read at a glance because it's so small. It's nice that the date is included, but if you don't have really good eyesight, it might not actually be that useful for you. But I think it's the right choice from a design standpoint. I think those two subdials do look a lot better than having like a date cutout would. The overall square shape of the watch feels like it has a lot more surface area than a round watch. So I think putting those subdials and the moon phase on there was a really good idea because otherwise you risk having the dial look very empty and sparse. The watch wears very well on my 7.5-inch wrist, and looking at it, you probably wouldn't guess that it's only 34 millimeters across. But these rectangular shaped watches do have kind of a visual trick about them. They wear a lot differently than round watches do. The visual impact seems similar to me to a circular watch with a 40 millimeter diameter. But since the lug-to-lug is pretty narrow at 44.5 millimeters, I think this is going to wear on a lot of wrist sizes. Even if you have a smaller wrist, because of that short lug-to-lug, it'll probably still fit you just fine. You know, just like the Apple Watch probably would. And that kind of brings up an interesting point because Apple does this sort of case proportions and they measure their cases on kind of the top to bottom rather than across. So what Apple terms a 40 millimeter Apple Watch SE also has the same 34.5 millimeters across that this watch from Casio does. So I was able to pick this watch up for the equivalent of about $80 here in Japan. And I think that's a very decent price for what Casio is offering here. As far as the specifications and build quality goes, I would definitely feel more comfortable with a watch from Casio than a watch from a fashion brand as far as the longevity and the durability of it. And I think the looks and the finishing of this watch definitely up there as well. The problem is going to be because these watches can be hard to find and often sell out, the prices that you're going to find on the secondary market are going to be inflated and they are very likely going to be above what you would probably want to pay for. Unless you really are into the novelty of this watch and just have to have it now, I wouldn't pay more than $100 for it. I don't think that's what this watch is supposed to be or meant to be. This watch works great at that $80 price point as something that's fun, well built, and from Casio. But when you start creeping up over $100, you know, Casio themselves have better offerings and there's going to be other watches that you're probably going to want to be taking a look at. Speaking of Casio, I do have some Casio themed t-shirts on my website at justthewatch.com like this one, so you can go over there and check it out if you'd like to support the channel in that way. Also, drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you think of this watch in particular. Do you like that idea of Casio putting out an Apple Watch homage, or do you think they should stick to, you know, what they're good at with those sort of cheap Casio digital models? This is not exactly my style. It's probably not one I'm going to wind up keeping, but it was too interesting for me to pass up, and I was happy I got a chance to get it in and take a look at it. That's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.